Now, when Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." He says to them, "But you, who do you say I am?" And answering, Simon Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And answering, Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the powers of death shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. Good morning. Welcome to a short biblical reflection on the Gospel reading from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 16, verses 13 up to 20. It is about Peter's confession, the Gospel reading for the 21st Sunday in Ordinary Time, Year A. As you can see on the screen, I have divided the text into smaller phrases, sentences, in order that we can much more easier follow the dialogue between Jesus and the disciples. The first question concerns what is the people's opinion about Jesus, and the disciples report a range of different opinions, starting from John the Baptist, then Elijah, Jeremiah, and even one of the prophets. And then the second question is more essential now, what the disciples themselves think about Jesus, because you can just follow the opinion of other people, but you have to have also made your own opinion. And Peter answers on behalf of all of them, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Then Jesus answers to him, making three statements. First, statements about that the revelation is as a gift that he received from the Father, not because of his own human ability he was able to reach to this profession of faith. Then about his status, that he's Peter, and that on this rock Jesus will build the church, and the powers of death shall not prevail against it. And finally, this statement about the keys of the kingdom of heaven, about binding and loosing. And then concludes with this strong warning to the disciples that they should not reveal that Jesus is the Christ. So we have in Peter's profession the statement about messianship of Jesus, and it concludes also the whole passage with it. In this occasion, it is also important to give a look at so-called synoptic comparison to see how the same story is related in other synoptic gospels, Mark and Luke. Both are short, only present the initial dialogue between Jesus and the disciples, concluding with the statement, Peter's affirmation about the messianship of Jesus in Mark, "You are the Messiah," and Luke, "the Messiah of God." And then with the conclusion that Jesus is warning the disciples not to reveal his identity, like we read in Mark, and he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. And similarly in Luke, he sternly ordered and commanded them not to tell anyone. But there is not that repetition as in Matthew's Gospel that he was the Christ. So the whole now announcement to Peter about revelation, about his identity, and also about losing and bounding is not included in Markan and Lucan Gospel in this story. Now let us see this concluding statement to Peter about binding and loosing. In our Gospel we read, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. The same pronouncement we find, but now addressed to all the disciples later on in the chapter 18, where so-called ecclesiastical speech discourse of Jesus, and this statement is framed by communitarian aspect of brotherly correction in verses 15 up to 17, that, for example, that the whole case statement should base on the mouth, on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, and then about the communitarian prayer which follows it in verses 19 and 20, as we read in verse 20, whether 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst. In the middle, to all the disciples, Jesus says, truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So in our text now, it is addressed just to Peter. In the other place, is addressed to the disciples. And now finally, let us look at the most essential pronouncement to Peter about his name, display on words as in Greek, because the name Peter in Greek is Petros, and the word rock is Petra. We read in our text, I tell you that you are Peter, in Greek Petros, and on this rock, in Greek Petra, I will build my church, and the powers of death shall not prevail against it. This word Petra appears yet few times in the Gospel according to Matthew. I will exclude that one that closing the tomb of Jesus with the rock, but we have at the end of the Sermon on the Mount this metaphor about building the house on the rock. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock, Petra. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it has been found on the rock, in Greek Petra. Then in chapter 27, verse 51, after the crucifixion of Jesus, at that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook, and the rocks, in Greek Petrai, were split. Based on this play on words and the usage of this word rock, Petra, in the Gospel according to Matthew, as well also referring more broadly, generally to the Old Testament messianic pronouncements, the renewal of the New Covenant, comparing against the Old Testament, because the commandments were written on the tables on the rocks. Now these commandments, new commandments of the new covenant, will be written on the heart of the people. So on one hand we have on a solid material, then we have on human beings. And here also we have this contrast. Firstly, hearing the words of Jesus, is building on Jesus himself as a rock, and now Peter is the rock on which other apostles, the whole church, will be sustained, will be built. Peter will be, in spite of his human weaknesses, he will be the solid point, the point of reference. So now on himself, on his human heart, Jesus will build, in contrast to the rocks of the temple, which were split at the moment of the crucifixion of Jesus. I would like to wish you a nice day, a nice reflection on this gospel reading. God bless you.